Good afternoon, everyone. Trackman 44 here. Well, it's a nice sunny day, and we got the ductwork almost all done up in the attic. And the other day I come down here before we had a hellacious rain, ran all the Freon lines. Of course, my son helped me with that. Kind of tough because when we penetrated the side wall up in the attic, we were roughly 26, 27 feet in the air. We had to get a little creative getting the ladder up there in order to get those Freon lines halfway decently bent and drawn down the wall. Okay, here we are back on the air handler, progressing right along. We went ahead and run the line set right down across the trunk line and right out a hole in the end of the house. Put another hole in the end for conduit to come up out of the basement for the electric for the air handler, and routed the refrigerant pipes up here and tied them right straight into the evaporator coil. What we use is a 15% silver-based solder that requires no flux, just a basic cleaning of your lines is required. A lot of times if the lines are fresh you don't have to clean them, but sometimes your fittings are a little bit old, a little tarnished, so you want to go ahead and touch them with a bit of sandpaper to kind of clean them out. And of course have you a cold wet rag ready, to cool down anything that you might get a little too hot with the torch, because it does require, I think it melts at 1400 degrees and flows at 1450. Those numbers could be off a little bit, but you get the drift. You're running with roughly 1500 degrees on probably a 3,000 to 5,000 degree torch with oxygen acetylene. So you want to have your ducts all in a row so you can do it reasonably neatly, quickly, be done with it, and cool everything down. So today we're setting the air conditioner in place. We'd made a set of brackets actually, and you can see them on the wall right there, out of nice angle iron, very heavy, substantial, and we got 3 wall anchors in each one, so it's going to be very, very sturdy. Now I've got Freon lines routed down the wall, but don't pay attention to how crooked they are, because I'll straighten those all up and I'll put Mineralac 1.5 or possibly 2-inch clamps to hold those in place, just like the conduit over here, because that's the conduit that's going to carry the electric wire up to the air handler in the attic. But at any rate, we're down here just welding in the lines. I've got three more joints to make over here, and we'll be done. I'm using a 15% silver and of course oxygen acetylene torch set, which is something that's absolutely necessary when you're doing this kind of work. It was really funny. I'd done that work for 40 some odd years, and whenever I retired I didn't even own a torch set. And so I was lamenting that fact, and I was pricing, looking around trying to find a set of torches that were reasonable. And of course they're not reasonable at all. And lo and behold, literally less than a mile outside my driveway, there was a farm auction. Actually, it really wasn't a farm auction. It was a guy that retired from Chrysler, and then he was moving into a retirement community, a retirement home. I bought this set of torches right here with a full set of tanks and about 3 pounds of silver solder, and I get $37.50 for it. And you talk about ecstatic, man, I tell you what, that really made me happy. But at any rate, that's just kind of a side story, don't really mean a whole lot. But I can't believe I worked all them years and never accumulated me a doggone torch. I got big set, in the shed, but not a little set. Okay, now that we got the liquid line, the dryer soldered in, up on the service valve, suction line soldered in, time to go ahead and bend the liquid line into place. And you probably wonder how we get these nice bends on there. I've got a handy dandy super duper large tubing bender that ratchets and makes those fancy 90s on that. But on these little guys it's really quite simple. If you take a look, you got 0 right here, and you've got 45, you got 90, you've got 135 and 180, and all you have to do is decide what length to allow to make the radius, and then just do this right here and hope that you come out about right. Okay, now see, I'm right in line. My 0 is in line with the 90, and when I pull this off we should have a 90-degree bend. That almost looks like factory. Now we make that joint and we're good to go. It's time to pressure test and leave it set for 24 hours with about 300 pounds of nitrogen pressure in the circuit. Now that we got the 90 formed, it's time to make the final connection on the liquid line dryer, or on the dryer, and the bi-directional dryer. And you don't want to burn this Armaflex insulation or everything, so you always keep some scrap metal around so that you can divert the heat. You can see by the black spot it's well used, but you just use that to deflect the heat. You can use that up against vinyl sidings or aluminum sidings or just about virtually anywhere. But that's what I'm doing here, is protecting that, because it takes just a split second. You got a big old nasty black spot and burn through the outside coating of that Armaflex insulation. And once you figure you've got a good weld or a good solder joint on all your connections, you want to pressure test this. And some manufacturers require, full 500 psi pressure test. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my nitrogen. You can tell by the the condition of my gauges. There's been a tank or two of nitrogen go through them. Those things have been abused something fierce. And this tank is not full. This tank is only got about 1,000 pounds in it. A full tank is about 2,200 pounds. But we'll open up the tank and we'll twist the regulator. Twist the regulator down to where we know we got at least a couple hundred. There's 250, 300 shown on the regulator. And because this is a heat pump, I'm using my low side gauge, which has a little bit better resolution, and I'm going to fill it through the small line, which is actually the liquid line in the summertime. But I'm going to go ahead and pressure test this up to probably 250 psi, and we're going to leave it set for probably 48 hours because I do not want to have an issue or a problem with this. You can hear the nitrogen going right on through the gauges if I was to get a little bit closer. Let me shut this off and see how far it's... Okay, yeah, see we got 275, 280 pounds right there. So let's go ahead and bounce it up to 300 pounds. We'll probably go over it. So what we'll do is we'll shut the tank off, release the pressure off of the regulator, remove my hose from the tank, and then don't sneak up on the pressure we want to leave it at, but sneak down to it. That'll relieve the nitrogen pressure off of the tank. And so now we're at 350 some odd pounds. And what I'll do is I'll bleed that nitrogen off until I get down just a few pounds above 300 psi. And then we're going to leave it set at 300 psi for at least 48 hours. If it still has 300 psi after 48 hours, we can consider we've got a complete and intact system. Okay, refrigerant lines are tied in. I've got 350 pounds of nitrogen pressure in there. It's going to sit there for 48 hours. We do not have the refrigerant lines squared and plumbed and secured to the wall yet, but we do have the liquid line and the suction line tied together completely from top to bottom. You can see obviously it was just a little bit of a challenge getting from the getting out of the attic and getting down here. If I remember right, that was 27 feet up on a 32-foot ladder. It's coming together quite nicely. We should be doing a startup on this very shortly. I was sitting here this morning editing this video and having my morning coffee, thinking about a couple of good friends, in particular GP from GP Outdoors up in central Ontario, and Davy Joe from Pennsylvania, simply because I'm sipping my morning coffee, or as Davy Joe calls it, my morning Joe. And of course other guys like DIY My Way, Grampy's Workshop, and just a host of other guys. I was just sitting here thinking about them. And but at any rate, I realized that it's time that I need to insert a little bit of an addendum into this part of the video. We're seeing the refrigerant lines run up the walls and all that stuff. I didn't really touch base on my nitrogen regulator very much while I was filming that down there. But the nitrogen regulator is something that you need to be careful of. Whenever you hook that up to a nitrogen tank, it's a minimum of 2,000 pounds on a fresh tank, 2,200 pounds or thereabouts, I guess, on a full tank. And a lot of times these regulators, like mine, get old and they get a little worn and they become a little unsafe. They really should be taken back and recertified occasionally. I've not done this one for years and years. It's really old. You can tell by how the gauges are beat up. Anytime you hook up your regulator, you always want to back the adjustment all the way out to where there's absolutely no pressure going through the regulator and coming out the other side. And what that does, that takes the pressure off of the diaphragm. If you were to open the valve really, really quick and just slam that pressure right up against that diaphragm, and if you've got weakened or worn threads on that adjustment T-handle, it could dislodge that handle if the diaphragm ruptures, and it could do some damage to you. I mean, there's all kinds of horror stories. You hear about guys being real careless with them and cracking the tank, and then blowing the T-handle right through their face and things like that. I've never seen that firsthand. I've never even had a problem with the nitrogen regulator as badly as what this one looks. I've still never had a problem with it. But that doesn't mean it's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day. But anyway, to make a long story short, just bear in mind, when you've got an oxygen regulator on an oxygen tank, or a acetylene regulator on a acetylene tank, or nitrogen regulator on a nitrogen tank, the pressure in that tank is considerable. Not necessarily acetylene. Acetylene is only a couple 300 pounds. When you crack that tank, make sure that T-nut is backed all the way out to where you're pushing none of the material through the regulator. That'll minimize any potential of any kind of damage of that regulator failing and blowing right at you or right in your face. Now, you couldn't really tell how I turned that on, but I've done it. It's just reflexive because I've turned them on thousands of times over the years. You literally don't look directly at that T-handle, because if you're looking at the T-handle, you know, right directly in front, that means it's coming right at your face. You always want to shift it just a little bit off to the side to where if there is a rupture or if there is a hazardous situation as a result, it should blow past you or at least catch you in the shoulder or somewhere where it might not kill you. But taking one to the face at 2,200 pounds of pressure is probably going to do a pretty good amount of damage to you. Again, I've never seen it. I don't know anybody that's ever had an issue, but it is one safety concern that you do need to be concerned about if you mess with these things, especially if you don't do it consistently, you know, or do it for a living. But at any rate, for now, this is TrackMan 44, and I am out of here.